Um, Good morning, everybody. I'm here in the United States, so I'm allowed to say good morning, good afternoon for people residing in Europe. It's my pleasure to host the first virtual session here at ACM Collective Intelligence on experts in the crowd. And I'm asking now all the presenters in the session to also rename them according to the schema that we've been provided with putting your P1 if you're presenter 1 and P2 so that you can also be identified. I think then it's time to start with the second paper that is Yunhao Zhang. I hope I pronounced that properly. And the title of the paper is Identifying Experts Through Revealed Confidence, Application to Wisdom of Crowds.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Jerry, you can call me Jerry. So I'm a fourth year marketing PhD from MIT Sloan. And today I will talk about identify experts through revealed confidence, which essentially introduces a new method to better identify experts that in turn improves wisdom of crowds. So wisdom of crowds refers to an empirical phenomenon that the aggregated prediction of a group, for example, the group mean, tends to be better than a random individual's prediction. It is a very important topic with great application values. And from group decision making to predicting election or sports game outcomes, all of these are related to wisdom of crowds. And within a crowd, some are experts and some are lay people. Yes? Okay. We may further improve wisdom of crowds by overweighting the expert opinions. Well, how to find the experts? Scholars have tried to identify experts through self-reported confidence. For example, by eliciting confidence interval or the probability that your answer is correct. And the empirical finding is quite robust that conventional self-reported confidence cannot reliably improve crowd prediction. And why is that? And presumably because people are overconfident or their confidence miscalibrated. And as showcased in Dunning-Kruger effect, both the experts and lay people say they are confident. So by overweighting people who state a high confidence, you may not be overweighting the experts' opinions. So for today's talk, I will focus on two key contributions from the paper. Firstly, our simple reviewed confidence algorithm can better review agents' expertise, which as a consequence improves crowd prediction. And secondly, to argue why reviewed confidence works, our paper highlights the importance of second-order uncertainty in measuring confidence. I will give you an example that showcases ignoring second-order uncertainty, as in the case of conventional confidence elicitation, may lead agents to exhibit over-precision without agents committing any biases. So how does RC work? So suppose the question of interest is, what is the median single-family housing price in San Francisco? So step one, we ask each agent for their initial answer X. So agent 1 says, 600K, and agent 2 says 1.4 million. And step 2, we provide each agent an influence or an advice, Y. We tell agent 1 that the average of 4 other estimates is 900K and tell agent 2 the average is 1.1 million. And to set the optimal influence, the distance between the initial answer and the influence needs to be held constant across agents. And the distance needs to be relatively large. And I will get to that later. So step 3, the agent provide their updated answer Z. So step 4, we calculate how much you update from your initial answer or the weight you put on the influence. So suppose you update from 600K to 750K under the influence of 900K. Then the updated answer Z can be characterized as a weighted average between your initial answer and the influence. So from which we could solve for the weight on influence W. But we argue that the weight on the influence is a measure of relative confidence. So basically, the more you update your initial answer given the influence, the less confident we think you are. And if you are really confident in your answers, you should resist the influence. Since the confidence is reviewed in the amount of update rather than self-reported, we call it reviewed confidence. And finally, to better leverage wisdom of crowds and get an aggregated estimate, we take an inverse variance weighted average over the initial answers. So the more you update, the less we rely on your initial answer in the aggregation. Due to time constraints, I cannot go through the empirical works in detail, but Main takeaway is that even though people can have behavioral biases and engage in non-Bayesian updating, meaning RC is not a one-to-one mapping onto expertise, we provide quite a few studies on empirical evidence that it is still better than conventional confidence and some other conventional methods in terms of identifying experts and improving wisdom of crowds. So the details are in the paper, but today I will try to convince you that RC is valuable with some non-trivial intuitions. So okay, why does RC work better? The immediate intuition is that those who know better deviate less. Okay, I know the answer. I don't update. Yes, that is true. But why is that happening? So why people appear to be less overconfident with RC than with self-reported confidence? So self-reported confidence is supposed to do the same thing, but why it doesn't work? We argue that conventional self-reported confidence elicits only first-order uncertainty, and RC reveals both first-order and, more importantly, second-order uncertainty. So first-order uncertainty is the uncertainty over the outcome, and second-order uncertainty is uncertainty over first-order uncertainty. So with the example coming up next, I will explain the two uncertainties and also show you how a perfectly rational agent without any cognitive or psychological biases can appear to be overconfident under conventional confidence elicitation, and how RC fixed the problem. So consider the following setting. All agents know that there are two coins with some probabilities of landing on heads. And the question of interest is, suppose a computer randomly chooses one of the two coins and then flips it. Will that coin land on heads or tails? So agents face a standard binary choice problem. So the conventional way to elicit confidence for binary question is what's the probability your guess is correct, and you may score the probability to make it incentive compatible. And the level of expertise in the setting depends on whether an agent knows the probabilities of the coins. So initially, the agent do not know the probabilities. Therefore, we can exogenously manipulate each agent's expertise by informing an agent about either one coin or both coins. Then we can compare the self-reported confidence of the more informed agent with the less informed agent. Now, let's suppose that there is an agent 2 who is informed of both coins. We tell her that probability of coin 1 landing on heads is 30%, and the probability of coin 2 landing on heads is 90%. So agent 2 is fully informed about the coins and she's the expert. So her optimal guess is heads and 60% chance of answering correctly. So the optimal heuristic is that each coin has 50% chance of being chosen and then flipped. And one coin has 30% probability of heads, the other has 90% probability. So the flip will have 30 plus 90 divided by 2 equals 60% probability of landing on heads. And that's her reported confidence. And everything's rational here. Okay, now there's another agent, agent 1. He is only informed of the probability of coin 2 landing on heads. So that's his only information, which is 90%. So he is the less informed agent. To answer the question, he needs to guess the probability of coin 1. So let's assume that he thinks the probability of coin 1 landing on heads is 50%, which is the ignorance prior. Given his available information, he gives a rational response, heads 70%, because 50 plus 90 divided by 2 is 70%. So the paradox here is that the less informed agent 1 appears to be more confident about his guess than the fully informed agent 2. So conventional confidence would mistake agent 1 as the expert, but actually the more informed agent 2 is truly the expert. So how does RC solve this paradox? So RC would inform both agent 1 and agent 2 that there is another agent, agent 3, who gave the answer heads 65%. Let me ask you this question: which agent is more likely to update? So the less informed agent 1 or the more informed agent 2? The less informed agent 1, right? Because agent 1 might think the provided advice or influence may contain information about this unknown coin 1. So fundamentally, agent 1 would update because he has uncertainty about his estimated confidence of 70%. And although agent 2 reports a lower confidence, she's less likely to update because she's precisely sure about her reported 60% since she has full information. So in the coin example, the outcome is the result of the coin flip. The first order uncertainty is the estimated probability that your guess of the outcome is correct. And the second order uncertainty is the uncertainty around your estimated first order probability, or basically the variance for your estimated probability. So conventional elicitation ignoring second order uncertainty leads a less informed agent to report a higher confidence than the more informed ones. So RC solved the previous paradox because belief update depends on both uncertainties. And more importantly, it depends on the second order uncertainty or the extent one can precisely judge her confidence. Yes, so basically, and in order to identify experts, we should measure whether one has more or less information rather than just focus on the reported probability. And in the paper, I have a belief updating model that incorporates second order uncertainty as well as the distance effect in advice taking. So distance effect refers to the phenomenon that people tend to assign more weight to a close influence than a distant influence. More about the property of the reviewed confidence and the model, because the model provides more insights on how to set the optimal influence. So firstly, the distance between the initial answer and the influence needs to be the same across agents. The intuition is to rule out the confound of distance effect. We don't want the amount of update to vary due to distance effect, as the distance is some exogenous feature unrelated to knowledge or information. And secondly, the influence needs to be relatively far away. The intuition is that if the influence is too close, it would give people a false sense of confidence. So the idea is that you don't know what you don't know. If the influence is too close, then you think there's nothing you don't know. So even if there's something you don't know, so you update less than you otherwise would. But if the influence is distant, you may be surprised and think this distant influence contains some previously unaccounted for information, and you should now incorporate that information by updating. In that case, RC will succeed. So the idea is that the influence needs to potentially get into people's unknown domain. But if they know everything, then they should update less. And to summarize today's talk, firstly, RC could improve wisdom of crowds because RC reveals both first order and second order uncertainty. And ignoring second order uncertainty could lead to rational over precision. And the crucial idea is we should elicit the amount of knowledge or information in identifying the experts. And conventional confidence is not sufficient in doing that. And thirdly, there is a model to analytically characterize RC's properties and provide guidelines on how to set the influence. So if you are interested, I have a draft ready, and I'm happy to present the full paper or discuss other RC-related projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for your presentation. Are there any immediate questions at the end of the presentation by the audience? Since we are only 3 presenters, I think it's possible to take 1 or 2 questions. Ralph, I see you're raising your hand, and Joshua. So maybe Ralph, you go first.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Jerry, for a really nice talk. I was wondering, do you really need a social source for this? Because I mean, from Wisdom of the Inner Crowd, for example, where you ask the same person multiple times, you also see that people who, without any social source, actually who deviate more in their second answer from their first answer, you also see that they are worse performers than the ones that actually stay very close to their original first answer. Comparing kind of the wisdom of the inner crowd versus getting a social estimate, do you think that receiving social information gives you more benefit than asking the same person again and seeing how much he or she deviates?
Oh yes, that's a very good question. So I know there is a type of question that people can get confidently wrong. For example, in my advisor's previous paper, there's a question: is Philadelphia the state capital of Pennsylvania? In that case, the obviously wrong answer is yes. But in that case, people get the questions. People who answered incorrectly also report a very high confidence because it seems to be the obvious answer, right? And then if you ask wisdom of inner crowds, of course it is. Yes, it's the state capital. But in that case, wisdom of inner crowds cannot reliably improve the prediction because people don't know what they don't know. But if you tell people other people disagree with you. Out of like 100 people, 80 people said the opposite answer. In that case, it gives them a chance to reassess their information structure. When they rethink the question, they may think, okay, well, why so many people disagree with me? Did I miss anything? And then when they reflect on their information structure, they may think, okay, what do I really know about the answer other than Philadelphia is the largest city in Pennsylvania, or the only city I know in Pennsylvania? In that case, they may realize they are not informed, they are not well informed. Then they may update more than they otherwise would. So if you just say the influences, everybody agree with you, of course they won't update. But with the artificial or intentionally set up social influence, we may potentially show them something. Okay, do you really know this information? Have you accounted for it? But if they haven't, they may update more. But if they have, they are more likely to be the experts.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Then we have Joshua. One more question, and then I think we're moving on.
Hi. Thank you so much for. Sorry, getting in. Hi. Thank you so much for doing this work here. It's really interesting. I was wondering. So if I think about like the type of data that's come from some past experiments, if you look at like that Jan Lorenz paper from 2011, they're looking at numeric estimates, and they're finding, if you look into their data, both this social resistance correlating with accuracy as well as confidence correlating with accuracy. They asked both, but we know, as you mentioned from Drazen's work, that that doesn't occur for all questions. I was wondering if either in some of your already existing empirical data or something you plan to collect, you have questions where the reported confidence is reverse correlated, but your observed corrects for that. Like, have you tested some of these trick questions specifically, like the Philadelphia one?
Yes. That's a very good question. So I actually tested. So RC still works. So it's particularly just like the surprisingly popular algorithm that my advisor worked on. So it's very good at reversing those the initially wrong majority opinions. And I also tried it on your recent paper. Basically it's the binary classification that you recently published in Management Science. So I also worked on those questions with RC, and then it's very likely that it can reverse the initially wrong opinion.
And well, sorry, I have more follow-up questions. If you quick yes or no, is there a difference in your mind between numeric and binary, or do they all follow the same basic principles?
They follow the basic. They follow the same principle, but it's a bit different when in terms of setting up the influence. So like basically in the binary case, then it's basically how much you update your probability measure. So if you update, if you say I'm like 70% sure, but all of a sudden you update to 60% or like 80%, then we assume that there's a lot of uncertainty in your estimated confidence. So that's a sign of low expertise.
That's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If there are further questions, I can directly chat with Jerry in the Zoom chat there and ask a question. And I think we're going to continue with the program. Okay, then I guess I'm going to take over. I'm going to give the second presentation. Okay, what I'm going to present is some pilot work that is been performed together with Elkady. She's also here, and we'll see whether we're going to do this a bit collaborative in terms of presentation. And Feny, Mai is a PhD student in computer science, and Feny, an undergrad student that worked on this pilot study. So the title of this paper or this presentation, Submissions to COVID-19 Data Science Challenges, the Role of Skills in Platform Engagement. And I was wondering why we were in this session, but I think throughout the conversation might become clear. We've seen when COVID-19 hit that a lot of companies turned to data science challenges and to solve COVID-related problems. So for example, on Cattle, you found challenges that were focused on either identifying COVID infections based on images and x-rays, or predicting infections based on past infection data. And it's one of those examples where data science challenges or using the crowd is used to solve societal challenges, because COVID-19 is one of the societal challenges that mattered for society as a whole. And if you go back into the literature, what actually makes people participate? Yes, on the one hand, we have incentives. There's a lot of work we know about. At the same time, we also know once they commit to participate, then skill level matters. So skill are really successful, whether they're going to be successful in making submissions. One of the major problems with these challenges we have often that we have a high number of, let's say, inactive people, those that are committed, that are unable to translate their motivations into successful submission or successful participation. And one of the reasons argued in prior literature is that they don't have the skill of doing so. There's actually little work about the role of platform engagement for a successful submission. When I refer to platform engagement, I'm talking about the features that we nowadays have on a platform like Kaggle. You do have, you're notified, you have access to a Jupyter Lab or kind of a notebook setting where you perform your data science challenges. You have example solutions. There's a lot of features or content that you can access to advance your knowledge of that particular task, to also then align with others, what others have been doing. So the question of this study was, the role of skills and also different degrees of platform engagement in predicting data science challenges. Is it possible to actually use those platform engagement to predict a successful submission? We used our own platform that we developed here as part of an NSF grant. It's a data science challenge platform that has a lot of features that build on React.js. So framework, so is a platform that allows social interaction. I'm not going to show you the demo, but what's kind of important to keep in mind that it has a state-of-the-art data science workflow. It has a Jupyter Lab. It also has a BigQuery integration, so you can actually query big data sets. You have pre-processed data, you have tutorials, you have real-time feedback, you have real-time scoring. You can also share a solution and you get peer feedback. The participants, they had the challenge to predict social crowding in the Tippecanoe County. So it was launched as a challenge around Purdue. We're here at Purdue in Indiana, and they got social movement data from a company called SafeGraph, and we pre-processed this data where they had information about where people went, which places they visited, and the goal was with this data to predict the most crowded place. And the places where you can spend money, but also where you can just be, like a church. And they had different types of data and social distancing data as well. They also had a mobility graph, where do people come from. We also scraped some executive orders for them so that they could potentially use that. There's also pre-installed libraries and tutorials related to that. They're evaluated in 2 dimensions. One was accuracy, so MAPE, but we also looked into their exploration, because we had to trace data, how many functions around, how many new models they tried. They went incentivized based on prior literature, so we actually modeled after a paper, I think, from Christoph Riedel in terms of individual and group performance. So it was an individual and a group or group performance. It's one of the first pilot hacks we ran on this challenge using these COVID-19 data sets. And we had access to a range of platform engagement activities, from viewing profiles, viewing calendar, viewing rules, and also actually working with BigQuery, running the Jupyter Lab, and so on. And so from passive to just passively looking at content to actually active engagement agent. Then we also have skill data. There was self-reported data about programming skills, how many months of experience they had in different program skill areas. And we used that plus the platform engagement to build different data science models. We looked at the degree of engagement, but also the timing of engagement. So the first time they engage in a particular action. So with this kind of pilot analysis, we had in the first challenge that we ran with this setting 75 registered users, and we had 48 submissions. In total, a lot of commands, and the participants tried in total about 17 different data science models from ARIMA, time series, etc. And they were very diverse in background, bioinformatics, statistics, engineering, social science. We tried this 3 different models, survival analysis, to see how long they engage and whether there's a difference between submitters and non-submitters. We also clustered them in terms of their skill profiles and platform engagement profiles. And then built logistic regressions to predict submissions. Here's just a correlation plot. I don't think I have to go into that. But what's worth noting is that actually skills were not correlated at all with submissions. When we looked at the survival of the participants, meaning the last day they engaged basically and running the app or participating in the platform, we found that those that committed to participate, sorry, I forgot to mention, everybody had signed up and had signed an agreement to participate in the challenge, accept the terms. And so they all committed. There also was a questions in that survey, are you committed to participate? So they had committed, but you saw that there's a strong dip just after day 1 where those that never submitted basically disengaged, whereas those that actually in the end submitted, they stayed in there, and we only had a dip after 10 days in terms of the platform engagement. In terms of skill profiles, we identified 2 skill profiles on the major difference in terms of the skills. Was the one had a much stronger Python programming skill, and in terms of the platform engagement, we found 3 different kind of clusters, and there was kind of low engagement versus high engagement. The one that, and then the cluster number 2 here that here in red, that was very high in terms of engaging with the data, querying our data sets that were, by the way, time series data, and they were also updated on a weekly basis. Then we tried a logistic regression, and the goal was really to build a really strong predictive model. And here we used regularized regression, and we split them in 70-30, and we really got a really quite a good model in terms of maximum accuracy of 0.922 and true positivity rate of 0.7 and false positivity rate 0.049, so not too bad. So we included here all the platform engagement activities that had a correlation of higher than 0.5. And what's kind of interesting also that you could build a really good model with just using the BigQuery interaction, showing that the active engagement with the data, actually very active for high frequency, was a really good predictor with, whether they would submit or not. When we then run an unrealized regression, we found that actually there's only one kind of feature that had an independent effect, that independently increased the likelihood of participation or submission, and that was actually the frequency of interacting with the query. So even though overall we can build a really good predictive model, there's only one that is actually explaining an increase. That's the active engagement with the data. Whether the others is more compound factor. And then we ran a second model as well, just using the timing, so the timestamp when they were when they're engaging with the platform, different types of the platform. And here you see the model quality in terms of accuracy, not too bad either, but there wasn't an independent effect of any of those temporal platform engagement metrics. So showing that temporality doesn't really matter. So overall, we saw descriptively that those that actually submitted were actually starting relatively late, but once they're started, they actually had a higher frequency. There's not a single timing aspect that matters, so it's more a compound factor. So again, it's a series of more studies that we are currently running because we have our own experimental platform. There's definitely limitations. It's only a small data set. And we also could, have looked into potentially greater variability. So our goal is to work with bigger data sets, but concluding remark, it is, I think, equally important to also look at platform engagement complementary to actually skill level and thinking about what actually makes a person participate, as they're so important for these data science challenges. If someone has an interest in the platform, here is also the address to look at it. We also have it's open source. It's released with an open source license. Here's the GitHub also. We also have a blog related to that, and there's also YouTube about the platform. Now, if there are any questions, I could take them right away, or Mai could take them. She's also here in the session. If there are no further questions, I think we can just move on with the third presenter, which is Alexander.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking part in this presentation on the project of introducing performance contingent symbolic awards into online communities, a natural experiment. It's a project from myself, Professor Christopher Lettl, and Tom Grad. And just to give you a short little overview of what we're doing. So basically, we're looking at the introduction of performance contingent symbolic awards into an online community via a natural experiment. And we're interested in how this affects the contribution behavior of members conditional on their experience. And what we find in a nutshell is the introduction of performance contingent rewards leads on the one hand to a reduction in the number of contributions on average by high experience users over a 6-month time frame. And this is also reflected in the aggregate. And when looking at the quality of contributions, we find that the low experience users reduce their contribution behavior after introduction of these awards, while this is not reflected in the behavior of the high experience users or in aggregates. But let's take a step back. And to take a step back, I'm going to ask you a few questions first of all. So this is a super biased sample, but let's do it anyway. Who has ever heard of any of the online communities below? You can just feel free to raise a digital hand if you want to take part, or raise a physical hand. And perfect. Who has ever used or benefited of the communities in the past month? I doubt a lot of hands will go down now. And within this community at the Collective Intelligence Conference, I doubt a lot of hands will even go down here. So who has ever contributed to any of the communities below? Okay. Well, it does reflect basically the huge impact that online communities have had on the larger society. But it also reflects, on the other hand, that these public goods that are provided by online communities are reliant on a very small number of users. And when looking into the contribution behavior, the contribution amounts of these users, even within the contributors, there is a power law distribution in the number of answers. But for a healthy community, it's not just about the quantity of contributions. Increasingly, researchers are also interested in the contribution quality. And it's basically what we know, it's a combination of both quantity and quality, which is important to online communities. And the issue is that when such experienced or embedded users decide to leave or not contribute anymore, or when non-experienced users don't decide to step up, these communities can disappear pretty much as quickly as they showed up. So communities ask the question, or the idea is how to contribute, how to incentivize users within online communities to contribute both more and of good quality. So first of all, what they usually don't employ, apart from sort of crowdsourcing communities that we just saw, for example, in the last presentation, usually they don't rely on monetary incentives or on contractual or hierarchical monitoring capabilities, but they employ non-monetary rewards, usually in the form of symbolic awards. These are represented virtually, usually as badges, medals, and awards. And moreover, they are predominantly in a contingent form. So they set out transparent goals and thresholds for users a priori, so they know what they have to do to achieve. And as awards are continually increasing, the number of awards, they're getting more sophisticated. And the most sought after ones usually combine criteria around quantity and quality. And what is motivating this study is if this continued provision of symbolic awards really is a panacea for online communities. And what we identified is mainly a lack of research on the introduction of these performance contingent symbolic awards and how they affect the existing member base. So the ones that are responsible for the community's growth. In particular, also interested in how the different experience levels of online community members may affect this. And we study this by looking at a natural experiment where we noticed that a set of performance contingent symbolic awards was introduced. and we use a difference in difference specification to estimate causal effects. We believe that thereby we are able to contribute to the theory on new forms of organizing and also provide a bit of a more nuanced understanding on the nascent topic of symbolic awards and performance contingent forms in particular. Just a bit about the previous literature. So we're not going to pretend that their performance contingent symbolic awards or the reception thereof does not lead to any increase in performance. Prior literature has found that in organizational settings and within online communities to a certain degree. However, there's little conclusive evidence, especially in terms of the introduction of awards in a setting that relies on the voluntary provision of knowledge, both in quantity and especially quality. And when deriving our hypothesis, we rely on a number of literature streams. On the one hand, it's motivational and signaling theory. So in particular, this threat of intrinsic motivation crowding out and signal distortion, which is especially relevant for high experienced or high performing members. In addition to the goal setting theory, which is relevant due to the threshold that these kinds of awards, these discrete rewards, set out that can on the one spectrum of high performance lead to a done enough effect, or for the lower experience and lower performance members lead to lack of incentives. And finally, the aspect of loss aversion is interesting as members' reputation has been found to be connected to contribution quality. And so this is also tied to kind of a reputation loss aversion for high experienced members that may not want to reduce their contribution quality. Taken together, we derive some hypotheses both on the contribution quantity versus quality, as well as regarding inexperienced versus experienced members. Putting it together, just briefly, what we expect is that high experienced users would reduce their contribution quantity, which would be reflected in aggregate, while low experienced users wouldn't show this kind of behavior. And in terms of quality, we'd expect the opposite, so low experienced users reducing their contribution quality, which then is reflected in aggregate, but high experienced members would not reduce their contribution quality. Brief notes on the context we're using. So we are looking at an online community which is focused on the topic of electrical engineering, one of the largest and oldest of its kind. And the treatment of relevance is the introduction of a set of 5 tiered performance contingent symbolic awards that reward the provision of helpful and correct answers. Our time frame of interest is around 1 year around the shock and includes 4,000 active and registered members across both communities. The control community we use is the Stack Exchange Electrical Engineering community, which is due to the fact that is a topical similarity is given, and most importantly, did not see such a similar shock. Variables we're looking at is the average answering quantity in terms of the number of answers per user per week. And for the quality variable, we're currently using word count per contribution per user per week. And we have an alternative robustness check using peer signals, so likes and score. Member type is operationalized in terms of experience via a median split of the members according to their contribution behavior before the window of observation. And we have an alternative specification for that as well. So turning to the results, pointing you first to the left side, which is basically a sample split analysis. It's a difference in difference regression specification. And we do find, in fact, that both in just a plain old OLS with fixed effects, but also in the main specification using a quasi-Poisson distribution, that there is a significant reduction in the answering quantity of high experienced users, while low experienced users don't seem to statistically significantly reduce their contribution quantity. And this is reflected in aggregate, as we hoped to see as well across the models, and most importantly, according to our main model, which is at the right-hand side, the Poisson with time and individual fixed effects, confirming our hypotheses thus far. In terms of quality, once again, looking at the results for the experienced and unexperienced members first on the left, we find, in fact, the opposite result as opposed to the quantity in terms that the low experienced members actually reduce their contribution quality, while high experienced members do not do so. We have to mention that we lose a lot of observations due to the inclusion of the fixed effects, especially in the low contribution group. So it's nice to see that at least without fixed effects, the sign remains the same, although the effect size is a little smaller. On the other hand, in aggregate, our plain old OLS model does show that this effect carries. However, we believe that the standard errors aren't really to be trusted due to the distributional characteristics of the dependent variable, which is why the results of the logged dependent variable, so the latter three models on the right, are more trustworthy. In summary, what do we find? So what does this mean? We find mainly that the introduction of symbolic awards, not merely the reception, can actually have a significant effect on contribution behavior, and that it's important to take member heterogeneity into consideration, especially if you want to understand how exactly contribution behavior is affected. And in terms of practical implications for tying to the presentation before, maybe it's worth thinking about taking into consideration whether one wants to introduce such an award at the conference on the future of Europe. And that's all from my side. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to hear any questions you may have.
Thank you, Alexander. Are there any immediate questions from the audience? Okay, then I think Natalie, do you have a question?
Yes. Hello, this is Natalia. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering whether the rewards you were introducing were all like quantity rewards, because one can consider introducing symbolic rewards for quality, especially if those rewards are not automatically generated, but actually given by other participants.
Yeah, so they might have gotten lost in time due to the shortness of the presentation, but these are awards that reward both quantity and, as we term, quality. So you receive these awards not just for providing contributions or any contributions, but you have to reach a certain threshold of contributions that are marked as either helpful or correct by your peers within the community. So it's kind of a combination of a quantity criteria and a quality criteria.
And did you see the difference in terms of your effects based on which kind of rewards were given? Oh, it's like one type of reward combining quality and quantity. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. What's the correlation between quantity and quality? Not sure if I have that right off the bat. What we do have is what I do have handy is the correlation between the word count and pure signals for quality, which is highly significant and positive. Regarding the correlation between the number of contributions one makes and the quality of these contributions, I don't want to say anything wrong. Feels like something I looked into early on, and now I don't have the answer handy. But definitely people that contribute more have a higher quality of contributions.
Okay, thank you. Then I think we're here at the end of the session, and we're moving on with the next one. Thank you for everybody attending, presenting. Thank you to the presenters and also those that raised questions. Thank you.